Did you know Variety, the children's charity, is the entertainment charity started by a group of show business people who found an abandoned baby in a theatre way back in 1928. These kind-hearted performers raised so much money to help the lost child that they began helping other children, and Variety, the children's charity, was born. Read the full story and support the entertainers charity that supports kids in need today. Visit variety.org.au. You're listening to the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast with me, Maury Morgan.
Ladies and gentlemen, your next comedian.
Shouldn't drink on an empty head, you know that, don't you?
That is the shittiest heckle I have ever heard in my life.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
What's a bucket list?
You have dangerously underprepared yourself for the shit that is about to get real.
Khaled Khalafalla has had a meteoric rise in comedy, but it could have turned out very different. Born into a medical family of surgeons and dentists, and growing up in Saudi Arabia and New Zealand, comedy's call must have been strong. Now calling Melbourne home, Khaled has well and truly put his mark on the comedy map, having come runner-up in the National Grand Final of Raw Comedy, winner of Green Faces, and now a regular on the Australian comedy circuit. In this School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast interview, you'll hear how Khaled compares metabolism to writing comedy, how his goal to be a radio host got him hooked on stand-up, and how he believes stand-up comedy is the root of entertainment in its purest form. You'll also hear about his newfound acting career and his upcoming Australian tour. And if you're curious about stand-up and want to kickstart your comedy career, the School of Hard Knock Knocks has courses running in Adelaide and Melbourne in June with Glenn Nicholas and the Nelson Twins. Visit www.schoolofhardknockknocks.com to check out the dates. And now, here's my interview with Khaled Khalafalla.
Pauline Hanson always comes out and she's like, 98% of Australians agree with me. Muslims don't belong in Australia. Fine. Only problem with that is 4% of Australians are Muslim. Which means 2% of us must be walking around going, fucking Muslims. Alright, enough race stuff just for... I have a cat and a dog. My cat's name is Spiky and my dog's name is Abdurrahman Abdulaziz. He's my dog. I decide what religion he is. I've decided he's Muslim. He's Abdurrahman Abdulaziz. He's not even my dog. I found him. He was running across the road, running straight into the middle of the intersection. Looked like he had a death wish. That's how I knew he was Abdurrahman Abdulaziz. I took him to the RSPCA. As soon as I got there, they were like, well done for bringing this dog. By the way, if no one claims the dog in 2 weeks, we'll kill the dog. And I'm like, don't kill Abdurrahman Abdulaziz. He will kill himself. He knows. He's highly trained. 2 weeks later, I get a call from the owners of the dog, and they're like, hey, we heard you handed in our dog to the RSPCA. We're not in Melbourne at the moment. Can you please look after him until we come back? And I was like, Jesus, Muhammad. No, I'm not going to do that. And then they were like, oh, where did you find the dog? And I told them where I found the dog. And then they were like, that's our address. So it turns out I didn't find a dog. I stole someone's dog from in front of their house, and then I drove him 20 kilometres away to the RSPCA where I put him on death row, and then I converted him to Islam. That's my favourite part of that story.
Good afternoon, Khaled. How are you, mate?
Hey, mate. How are you?
Oh, I'm very good. I'm in Melbourne. You're also in Melbourne. Is that right?
That is correct.
And the reason I ask that is because I know that you travel a lot and touring with comedy. So I just wanted to double check that you were home. I guess.
I do call Melbourne home. Thanks for having me on the podcast, by the way. Before we get really...
Oh, you're more than welcome. You're on a meteoric rise. So thank you for having the time to talk to me. Well, I want to get...
That's very kind of you. I appreciate that.
No worries. I want to get cut straight into it. Khaled Khalafalla, the people who maybe are new to comedy may not know that name. They will soon. You've done very well in terms of being noticed in the comedy world. You've won a couple of awards, and we'll get to that. But I want to go back. So for those that do know you, and those that are probably reading a little bit into your name, it's not it's not Bill Smith, is it? It's Khaled Khalafalla.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, because I guess I grew up in I'm a 75 model, and I grew up in the 80s with Wogs Out of Work and all of the sort of a good, Wogs Out of Work was the thing, and it was Greeks, Italians. Not so much Lebanese in Melbourne, but I know Lebanese a lot in Sydney. And so you're in this space now that was kind of made. Well, almost. Yeah, you're in a completely new space because you're a Khalid. You're not a George, right? Or an Arthur, which was a very common.
That's correct. Yeah.
A common sort of woggy name, inverted commas.
Yeah.
So let me understand. Egyptian born, is that right?
Yes, yes. I'm Egyptian, but not Egyptian born. So my heritage is Egyptian, insofar as my entire family is born in Egypt except me. I was actually born in Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
And I lived there until I was about 7 years old. From there I moved to New Zealand.
Yep.
I lived there for a few years and then to Australia.
Yeah, right. You have dropped the Kiwi accent very well.
Yeah, it was actually a very formative time in my adolescence learning English when I was in New Zealand. So I actually had a very thick Kiwi accent. But a weird story, I actually went to an American school when I was in Saudi Arabia. So I learned to speak an American English, and that more or less became my mother tongue because it was almost the first language I learned to speak alongside Arabic. So I had a kind of duality about me, speaking both Egyptian Arabic with my parents at home and American English.
Yep.
And so when we went to New Zealand, my mother tongue was still kind of American English. And so I was speaking to my brothers in American English and then going outside and I'd speak to everyone else in this Kiwi accent.
Yeah.
And that other language, the outside language, my brain kind of compartmentalized those two languages, those two accents as two completely different languages. And to this day, I'll go home, I'll still speak to my brothers in an American accent.
Yeah, right.
And speak to everyone else in whatever accent is that of the land.
Yeah.
For want of a more poetic term.
Yeah, no, nice one. Makes you very suspect as a spy, I imagine, in some jurisdictions. You've been to the US, haven't you? Because I looked at some of your travels. You've done New York.
I have been to the US. Yeah.
How did you get through customs? Any issues?
Customs there are notoriously hard on everyone because I went. I remember thinking I'm probably, it's probably a stereotype that customs won't let me through in the US because I'm Arab, et cetera.
Yeah.
But when I went, they were actually incredibly tough, and they're really scrupulous about everything that you've got on you.
Yeah.
They want to search your bags a little bit more. They want to touch you a lot more than they do in Australia. Australian people I get stopped for the bomb thing literally every time.
Yep.
But
when you say the bomb thing, you mean
US,
where they test for gunpowder?
I mean the bomb test.
The gunpowder test, is that the one?
Sure, yeah. They test for gunpowder. They test for I get explosives, they call it. So it's an explosive test. And they actually ask you as you get there, do you have any explosives on you?
Do they?
Like that, like if you did, that would be the winner.
Dumbest bomber ever.
You'd think they'd be a little bit more, They try and kind of hustle you out of it a little bit. Like they just kind of ask you if you have explosives. If I did have explosives, I totally wouldn't answer that. I have to trick someone into it. Like, yep.
Yeah.
Do you have your ticket? Yep. Do you have your bag? Yep. Do you have your clothes? Yep. Do you have a bomb? Yep. Gotcha.
No.
But yeah, they touched you a lot more in the US. Patted you down.
Right. Oh, there we go. And they didn't think, hang on, why is this guy? A minute ago, he was talking with a Kiwi accent. Now you've got an American accent.
Yeah, but I was speaking to them in an Australian accent because they're not my family, and that's the weird thing. I only speak to my family in an American accent. I speak to everyone else in a different accent. But because I now firmly have an Australian accent, so I identify as kind of an Australian.
So imagine if your brother was standing beside you at the time and you just broke into him, and
I would speak to them in American. I'd speak to my brothers in an American accent and speak to the American dude in an Australian accent.
Right, you wouldn't have got through customs, that's for sure. You would have been in a lineup very quickly. Well, there you go. It's an experience that, at the end of the day, you are a comedian, so some of these troublesome experiences do add to your comedy. Do you find that? Does it become part of your stand-up?
Yeah, sure. I think troublesome experiences do, as you call it. I think think when you're under pressure and your senses are heightened in any sense, it leads to a good story. But sometimes you've got to process it. I always think about experiences in life like food. So you're eating things, you're consuming the experiences around you, but each experience has a different amount of time that it will take for you to digest it and process it. So as with everything, when you eat anything, you can't use that energy straight away. Sometimes it takes a while to build.
Right.
And so you've got an immediate energy out of it. So you've got an immediate energy that you can extrapolate from the food that you eat that will allow you to run now. And then you've got the long term, which is the compounding effect it will have on the building of your muscles and the synthesizing of the stuff that you've eaten, and the distribution of which into the growth of your organs and your muscles and your your general well-being over a longer period of time.
Yep.
And I think that's the same thing. Sometimes an experience will change your thinking in the long term. And that's the kind of energy that you can use from that experience, even if you're not talking about that experience specifically. You've actually benefited in the way that it's changed your thinking in the long term, and you can use the analysis that you had in that situation or of that situation over a period of time to apply that same way that you would, the same analysis to other new situations.
Wow, that is the longest analogy I've ever heard to comedy. But
sure, no, I have a little bit of analysis paralysis with some things, but passionate about it.
Can I ask, is your background prior to getting into comedy, because that's actually my second question, we haven't moved very far yet, is how did you get into comedy? Is your background something to do with physiology or medicine or
no? So
sports science?
No, all of my family are in medicine. So my mother's a dentist, my older brother's a surgeon, my father's a surgeon.
Oh, okay.
And my younger brother was studying science actually for the most part. And I actually went into the humanities segment, and I went into journalism. So I studied journalism and did a lot of philosophy journalism stuff.
Yep.
Graduated, I worked for The Age as an intern for a year, and then I moved into PR. And then while I was doing that, I was really interested in doing radio because I met someone when I was an intern at The Age who was doing the radio beat. His name was Michael Lallo, and he was writing for the Green Guide. And I remember one time he took me on an interview while he was interviewing Dave Hughes, and I was really interested in Dave Hughes as a radio announcer rather than a comedian. And I kind of fell in love with the idea of being a personality in entertainment. So I pursued radio, and I started doing stuff on Student Youth Network, CNFM.
Yes, So
I did a couple of programs on that, and I pitched a whole bunch of radio demos.
Was it in joke?
It wasn't in joke. Years later, I would be a guest on In Joke, ironic, but I was doing Get Serial, which was their breakfast show, the 6 to 9 a.m. show, and I did that. And I also did a show called World Beef with a friend of mine at a 3 to 4 p.m. slot.
Right. So you're perfectly aligned for developing your own brand then, because you, as you said, from journalism into PR, getting out there, meeting a lot of comedians and being in that space before you were the actual product, before you were the comedian.
That's correct, yeah. In theory, I've got all of the skills required, but you know how life works. It's not completely linear, and sure, you can do a lot of things, but you're not necessarily using everything that you've done in the way that it's intended.
Well, you're going to be more savvy though too, and I'm going to go there. But you're actually signed to Mushroom Comedy.
That's right, yeah.
And I believe Jeff Green is one of the not only a comedian but actually one of the executives at Mushroom Comedy.
He is a manager of mine. That's correct. Yeah.
There we go. And Jeff Green, of course, is an amazing comedian. Yet to be on this program, although we do bump into each other regularly at the IGA because we live next to each other, just down the road.
How about that?
Yes. But enough of him. So you got signed to Mushroom. So wow, it's amazing meteoric rise. So let's go back to 2011. You did Raw Comedy, is that my understanding? And you got to the Nationals.
Yes, I did. Yeah. So Raw Comedy is a competition. It's kind of like Australian Idol, but for comedians. Everyone does 5 minutes. You can apply just through a website. It's an open kind of casting cattle call, if I may. People come in, they do their best 5 minutes. About in the year that I did it, and I don't think it'll be too far from this, but around 2,000 people around the country enter, and they whittle them down from, maybe about 40 or 50 people in a first heat or in the first, few heats. And then they whittle them down to a final 20. They whittle those down to a final 10 in every state. And then they, choose one person from every state and a couple of wild cards to come to go to the finals, the grand final. And so you've got essentially, between 8 and 10 people in the grand final who have been whittled down from 2,000 people, all doing their best 5 minutes. And then they normally have a panel of judges, people who are distinguished in the discipline and an industry of comedy in general, either people who are critics or performers or producers of comedy in some capacity, become the judges, and then they pick a winner who goes through the Edinburgh and does, I think it's called So You Think You're Funny.
Yep, that's right. I think they get fast tracked, don't they? They get past the initial heats in Edinburgh in Scotland, and then you get in there.
Yeah, so they've got a similar thing in Scotland. Yep. And they essentially pass, like you were saying, the first few heats, and they just get to the grand final.
Dane Rathbone won that year, 2011.
Yes.
Fantastic. I do know there's a couple of names in that group. Adam Knox, who has a podcast and regular comedian and MC around Melbourne.
Now does a very successful show called Chimp Cop at the Comedy Festival. Yeah, there you go. Great reviews. You guys should check that out.
Well, I have spoken to him, and we will get him on the show eventually.
Great.
So 2011, well done. Then. The following year, Green Faces. Now, Green Faces, if you don't know this, because I think it's borrowing, you might be a bit young, it's borrowing from Red Faces, the Hey Hey It's Saturday variety show segment where people with very little talent, sometimes with talent, would come on, perform, and I think it actually shut down the return of Hey Hey It's Saturday because they did a blackface.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately, that was bad production, but bad casting.
I do remember that.
And you remember that one? So Green Faces is kind of a borrow from that.
Yep.
But of course, green also meaning new and fresh.
Yep.
And you did well in that. Did you win that 2012?
I did win that. Yeah. So that was in Canberra. So we had, I think.
Yep.
I can't remember whether there was a heat in Melbourne first, but I just remember driving up with a bunch of comics to Canberra, and that was fun. And then and it was just doing your best 10 minutes. So Raw was your best 5 minutes, Green Faces is your best 10 minutes. And I think they're a little bit more lax on the rules because of as far as how established you are as a comedian. Because I know in Raw you're not allowed to have earned any money or some sum of money, some very nominal sum of money that
$500, I think.
$500, right? Okay, so you're not allowed to have earned more than $500 in comedy. Which is hard to police anyway, but becomes very evident once you perform.
Sure.
But in Green Faces, people were a little bit more seasoned. They were allowed to have earned money. There'd been people who had been doing it for, anywhere between 1 and 5 years.
Gotcha.
Generally, who can enter Green Faces.
Yep, gotcha.
Is the competition still on?
I don't know, but I never heard about it until
I haven't seen it.
I interviewed Marty Wilson, who he's a comedian from, I think the late 80s, early 90s, the era of your Elliot Goblet personalities, but Sydney-based.
Sure,
and he won it back then in, I think, the late 80s and went from that experience to the UK and started a comedy career in London and England and before returning. So I did know about it back then. So it's been around a while. Yeah, is it around? I don't know. So now let's go a step back further. What made you get into... What made you do Raw comedy and then Green Faces? Where were you months before that?
Months before doing Raw comedy, I was studying journalism. So I was in. Was I? No, I wasn't actually. I was. I'd graduated. What was I doing? That's right. So I was working in PR, and I was submitting a whole bunch of demos, radio demos through SynFM to all the people at all the stations that I could get a hold of at the time. So Nova, Fox, whatever. I can't remember what other stations were on at the time. Maybe Vega was on back then. Mix, whatever. Anyways, I'm sending all these guys demos, and I'm noticing that everyone on radio is kind of a not everyone, but a lot of the big personalities were former comedians, and if not former comedians, current comedians who are also doing radio. I started studying commercial radio at uni. I did a postgrad of commercial radio at Swinburne Uni.
Yep.
And a bunch of people were coming in from the radio industry to speak to us in lectures and tutorials, and telling us about their path into radio. And a lot of them had this same sentiment that if they could go back, what they wish they would have done is tried a lot more public speaking and tried a lot more stuff in comedy writing and in comedy performing. And they said that everyone in the industry and almost every facet of entertainment looks very favorably on stand-up comedy as kind of the root of entertainment in its purest form, because it's the only remaining discipline where you have to produce, edit, broadcast, direct, write, cut, and and present your own stuff and get an immediate reaction, which then amends and molds your trajectory on how you continue to write, produce, edit, direct. And so it lets everyone know in the entertainment industry, if you're an accomplished stand-up in any capacity, you're also someone who understands how a mass thinks, how they react, what they think is funny, and essentially what content can be turned into something financially viable. You've got a basic understanding of that in a way that's unparalleled to people that have studied it in theory. So everyone in the radio industry was telling me how people immediately look very favorably upon stand-up comics when they come to apply for any role, if they're accomplished in stand-up comedy, whether that be acting, whether that be radio, whether that be writing, whether that be. And I think it's that's what I based my entire entry into stand-up comedy on, and when I started comedy with the sole purpose of giving myself a leg up in radio.
Yep.
And once I got into comedy, I kind of I fell in love with it. It was a whole new world of freedom.
And where was your first gig? Where was the first gig that you did?
My first stand-up gig, believe it or not, was raw comedy. So
was it?
My first gig was the first heat of raw comedy. My second gig was the second heat, and my third gig was the grand final. So people
that
can
annoys
still.
me.
I've got a very public record of all my gigs from beginning to now. So if you want to see what I looked like in my third gig, it's grand final of raw comedy.
It's there. Wow. I think there's a couple of people who fall under in that sort of from novice to public figure very quickly. I think Matt O'Kine might have also done similar things, although I think he only got to the New South Wales final or Queensland final, unfortunately.
Sure,
yeah, that's right.
Wait, if I can amend something, actually, I've got to say I'm actually lying about that being my third gig. I truly had buried this in the past. I didn't mean to come across like I was lying, but I just realized in 2008, so I did Raw in 2011, but in 2008, I realized I actually did enter Raw, and I tanked horribly. And this was while I was at uni, so this was before any of my foray into radio or public speaking or anything. I literally had just come out of high school, and I decided to enter Raw, and I had no jokes. I didn't write anything. I just went up and I riffed for 5 minutes. And it was horrible. I just tanked horribly, and I left, and I didn't think about it again for about 3 years until it was brought up again. So until it was brought up again through radio. So Raw comedy was actually my grand final of Raw comedy was actually my fourth gig. Sorry,
there you go.
Because I did do a gig in 2008. And I tanked the first time in Raw and got knocked out the first round.
It's still amazing. It's still incredible.
Thank you. I came back with a vengeance in 2011.
You did, yeah. And talking about vengeance, you actually got named as, I believe, one of the top 7 actors set to explode in 2017. And this was a News Corps publication. Does that ring true? Does that sound familiar?
Yes, I remember that article because I read it many times.
Yeah, you would have, and shared it. I'm just thinking, is it bad taste? I mean, it's probably this kind of comment's a bad taste, but actors set to explode, an Egyptian, a Saudi Arabian-born Egyptian. It's
peculiar wording. Peculiar wording.
Yeah, I guess everyone else was like Smith or Lee or...
Yeah. And then Khaled Khalafalla set to explode.
It seems bad taste at the time, but maybe it's us.
I was like, bad wording, but I'll take it.
That's it. That must have been a thrill.
Yeah.
Must have been a thrill. Obviously, it was last year, so you're still in the process of exploding. It's a slow motion explode.
I was very thrilled about that, especially because I haven't given much thought into acting. I kind of primarily want to do stand-up comedy, and it's weird because it feels very reminiscent of me entering comedy, which was as a means to an end. Someone had told me that comedy would help my radio career, and I entered comedy and I really loved it. And I, ended up, I think, being much better than I thought I would be because I was very focused because I had a goal. And likewise with acting, it was actually Jeff Green who sat me down and with one audition one day, and I really wasn't taking any auditions seriously. They kept putting me in auditions, and I would do these auditions, not learn the lines properly, turn up a little bit late, really show a lack of respect for the entire process and discipline because I couldn't link how it could help my comedy career. I was very stuck on this romantic notion that I'm a comedian, a touring live comedian, and nothing else. And I really felt, while that might seem entitled and very brattish of me. One, I was, much younger when I started doing this. I'm talking about when I was 21, 22. But secondly, and especially given, that I was getting these opportunities, but secondly, I also felt a little bit protective of my devotion to stand-up, and I kind of had this idea that if I allow myself to enjoy other disciplines, it might take me away from what I think is my magic in comedy, what I think is this spark that's allowing me to immerse myself completely on stage. And I was so worried to lose that by focusing on anything else. So I would give everything else its disdain. But it was only when I spoke to Jeff and he told me he'd done a few acting roles, and he actually said that this is he helped me to link it and to reconcile the two ideas, and that they aren't opposing, but in fact they're going to help each other. And they're going to really, it's going to really help my performance on stage, and to distance myself a little bit from the crowd, to focus on my own work and the performance of the actual piece. And in some way you are an actor on stage as well, performing your own script. So once he said that to me, I really allowed myself to immerse myself in scripts. And from there, my first role was just by Australian standards, a big budget movie where I played a very big role in it, which was huge for me. The moment I kind of focused on the script a little bit, and Jeff, he sat me down, he went through the script with me several times because he saw the role and he just said, this is definitely you. Don't let yourself down. Really focus on this, and I think you can get it. And then I did. I ended up being on in Ali's Wedding, which started off as a small community idea and script that then turned into a book that then became an award-winning book and got all these Writers Guild awards, etc. And then they got me to play the brother of the main character. And in a comedic role in this movie. The movie ended up getting a whole bunch of funding from Screen Australia. It ended up being a $6 million budget, and then they ended up getting a whole bunch of people. For example, I'm going to not name names because I am going to mess them up and I'm going to miss some other people. But the cinematographer who did things like X-Men and Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right. And then they had the director of Modern Family directing it, and then they had a very elite cast and crew, to say the least. And I was the least of them, and I was very lucky to be a part of this thing. It ended up winning a whole bunch of awards. Yeah, right. Ended up getting, the most popular movie at the Sydney Film Festival. It had a 3-week cinema screening nationally in Hoyts and Village cinemas. And then actually, as of last week, it got picked up by Netflix. And now it's going to be on Netflix. So that was my first role that we actually started shooting 2 years ago. It's called Ali's Wedding.
I've not watched it.
Shame on you.
Ali's Wedding. But,
how are you not in touch? The rich tapestry of Australian comedy and film.
I do know that you played a character called Mo Green, which confuses me. Were you like a Muslim Jew or What's the?
I was an Iraqi Muslim hung up on being in the mafia, and I loved. Apparently, there.
Okay, Green though. Green.
It is. Green's it was an odd name to me as well. I thought the same.
Yeah.
But
well, Jeff Green would have loved it. Hence why he put you forward. I guess.
Apparently, there is a Mo Green in Scarface.
Ah, okay.
Have you seen Scarface?
Oh yeah, with my 9-year-old was asking me where the line.
Your 9-year-old.
Yeah, he was asking me this line because I've used it before. Say hello to my little friend, and he thought it was just a joke somewhere, and I said, no, watch this video. Bizarre. This was yesterday, so just that bit.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was. Apparently, there's a Green somewhere in that movie, or some gangster movie that I don't know about, and his character was, it's a comedic character, and he wants to play Mo Green. Anyways, that was Ali's Wedding. We shot that in 2015, and then in 2016, I did a role. I played I did taking Jeff's advice to really focus on scripts.
Yep.
No matter how small the role is. I was actually just auditioning for the small role of a guy who was a barista for Upper Middle Bogan. He appears for about 30 seconds in one episode.
Yep.
I did the audition, and they, and then from just that audition, just because I put a lot of effort into it, they actually went, you know what, we really like you, and we think you could play a character in every episode in the full series. So I ended up playing, becoming a part of the family. Yeah. In season 3 of Upper Middle Bogan, which also got picked up on Netflix.
That's right.
And then got picked up by a US network as well.
There you go.
And it kind of, from there, that's kind of what got me kind of noticed for that article you speak of.
Yeah. Actors set to explode in 2017. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Incredible.
So just like that, from 2 roles and 2 auditions, essentially, just by focusing a little bit on Jeff's advice and the wonderful people around me helping me focus on it.
Well done. Well, I've got a couple of more questions, but we are running out of time, so I'm going to be quick on these ones.
Yep, I'll answer quickly.
You are very outspoken, and that's what I like about your comedy. You get up there, nothing seems to be taboo, and you've spoken openly about freedom of speech. And I guess maybe that's ironic, given that you're born in Saudi Arabia, but maybe that connection emphasizes the importance of freedom of speech. I don't want to go all psychoanalyst on you, but
sure. I'm not so sure I've spoken about freedom of speech, but I've spoken freely.
Yeah,
and I'm an advocate.
Yeah, I think you have been quoted as just saying that freedom of speech is important within comedy, and that we should be allowed to speak about things, and it is related to, as long as it's in context, and the context is comedy, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. Yep.
You're not walking down Burke Street with a placard saying "All immigrants go home," but you're on stage talking about immigration, some of the challenges of immigration in a comical way. But the direction I'm going here is that because of your outspokenness, you have had a lot of criticism from those within comedy, the snowflakes, if I want to borrow from that expression.
Yep.
How do you deal with that? So for an up-and-coming comedian who might be similar in their outspoken views, and I'm not suggesting in any way they're sort of right-leaning, anti-immigrant or homophobic or whatever. But how do you personally deal with that extra pressure?
I think I've really come to evolve a little bit. I know you don't mean anything, specifically confrontational when you say snowflakes, for example. But I think anyone who's offended by something, you don't have to listen to everyone. You kind of grow to assess how much impact their words should have on you. But I went from really not listening to anyone and not caring what anyone really thinks about what I have to say to I think assessing a little bit more who I can listen to, and I think that's made me a better comedian and generally a better person. But yeah, I do tend to listen to people a little bit more now, and try and stay within my own identity and what I believe is right. But I really feel like there's the type of person who can, and it's not as binary as I'm making it out, but there's the kind of person who can, really truly not care about what anyone thinks and live in their own bubble.
Yep.
And then there are those that care too much about what people think. And are not able to create their own identity and stand out.
Sure.
And be a leader in any capacity or intellectual capacity.
Yeah, like a windsock.
sure, yeah. And the person that I'm trying to become is someone who is strong enough to listen to other people without necessarily being completely immersed and influenced, and understanding everyone's points of view while still remaining firm in my own identity. And that's a real challenge because you do get influenced by people as much as they get influenced by you. So I'm listening a lot more.
And do you get personally, at first or at any time, do you get personally down to any form of any criticism about what you've got to say? How do you deal with that actual pressure?
You know, I used to. I used to not care at all. It used to not get me down at all whatsoever.
Yep.
But I think that was, that really was a form of pathology. It really was a form of not. Of not listening properly because many things should have gotten me down that didn't. And I think being down about something, I'm not going to let it cripple me and get in the way of my progress, but I certainly will allow myself to get down and not shun or put a taboo around getting down. People go, "Oh, don't let it affect you at all." Don't let it. But the truth is, if you're a human and you care about your humanity and your place within a group of people around you, being down or up or, sharing in people's success or failure, feeling people's offense and their happiness are all parts of being human and being able to organically grow and tell your own story. So I actually encourage people to both be elated with other people, but also feel people's hurt and pain if something that you're saying is causing that. And not necessarily let yourself be influenced, but let yourself take it in, like I'm saying with, the idea of food and digesting. Take it in, digest it, and come out with whatever your body allows you to come out with. Come out with whatever your brain synthesizes that influence as. Don't shut out the stimulus, but take it in, process it, and come out with the new ideas that, do that. You may well listen to someone being offended, process that, and come out and go, nope, doesn't affect me, I shouldn't change. Great, so be it. But don't shut it out because it's a very valuable input.
Yep. And at no point do a poo on stage. That's not what you're suggesting, are you, with that synthesis of food?
I mean, look, sometimes you should. Sometimes you got to do a poo on stage. What are you going to do?
You're definitely not going to do a Björk on your current tour. You've got a tour coming up. I believe you've got, is it Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide?
Sounds about right.
Those are the main cities you're hitting?
Yes.
Tell us about those. What are the dates so
That's
people
correct.
listening to this can go and see you perform?
I cannot remember what the dates are, but there will be a link that I will give you that you'll be able to put up on your website. The link is on my page at the moment. You can also go to frontiertouring.com. I know for certain Melbourne is going to be July 21st, and that'll be at Comics Lounge. I'm doing the Sit Down Comedy Club in Brisbane. I'm doing the Comedy Store in Sydney. And Adelaide, I'm doing the Rhino Room. I cannot remember which dates they all are, but they'll all be in July. And tickets are going to be out now, if you're listening to this. Frontiercomedy.com or your website or my page, all of which will have the ticket link. And on all of my videos, I'll have, and all of my posts, I'll have the link available as well.
Perfect. That's right. So if you are listening to this off our website, there will be a link. If it's iTunes or Spotify or any of the other podcast platforms, there will be show notes with hyperlinks in there. Don't worry about that. Yes. Well, I think that's it. Well, fantastic. An excellent interview. Thank you very much for sharing everything.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been a privilege. I look forward to getting along to one of your shows. I keep abreast of your comedy because we have a mutual friend, Chris Asher, who's in the production of content, video content, and has been following you around, I believe, for a week or so recently. So a lot of the videos that are coming out on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, he was behind the camera. So you've done very well. Whoever's managing you, I guess it's Jeff and the team at Mushroom or Frontier, the bigger family, are doing a great job in getting your brand out there.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Now, I think a big part of that is actually Chris Asher, who's been working a lot with me in social media strategy, and he's been helping me with the filming and production of content, and he's become much more intuitive to what I'm doing and how to reach my fans. So he's also really great in that regard, and he's been helping me across all brand-related content. So big thanks to Chris as well, but also my management have been doing a really great job.
Excellent. And good shout out to Chris Asher. Get along to check him out at Oink Media. Yeah. There we go. Well, fantastic, Khaled. Thanks for your time. I will let you go. And, I'll be in contact with you very soon about when this podcast comes out. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great talking to you. Have a great tour.
My pleasure. Thank you, Maury. I appreciate that.